The first time Sadie Okafor knocked on my door, she was holding a fire extinguisher and demanding to know if I'd set my kitchen on fire again. I hadn't. That was the smoke detector's fault, not mine, and I stand by that distinction to this day. That was 11 months ago. By the time this story really starts, she'd knocked on my door so many times I'd stopped bothering to check the peephole. I'm Jonah Reyes, 30 years old, a software developer working remote out of a 2-bedroom apartment in Denver that I picked mostly because the building allowed dogs I didn't own and had decent water pressure. Sadie lived 2 doors down, Unit 4C to my 4A, and somewhere between the fire extinguisher incident and the following Tuesday, she had become a fixture in my apartment the way a couch or a bad habit becomes a fixture. She was 28, a veterinary technician with a laugh that carried through drywall, and she had exactly zero respect for the concept of texting before showing up. She borrowed sugar. She borrowed eggs. She borrowed my strong Wi-Fi when hers went down, which was often because her router was, in her words, held together by spite and a paperclip. She showed up with leftover pad thai because she'd made too much. She showed up with nothing at all, just her, flopping onto my couch like she paid rent there, asking what I was watching before I'd even said hello. I started keeping count. Not seriously, not with a spreadsheet, though given my profession that wouldn't have been out of character. Just casually, in my head, the way you notice something becoming a pattern before you admit it's become a habit you'd miss. You do know this is the 3rd time this week, I told her one Thursday night, back in February, when she let herself in using the code I'd given her for emergencies only, ostensibly, and dropped onto my couch holding a bag of chips she had not offered to share. Is there a limit? She asked, not looking up from the show already playing on my TV, which she had also turned on without asking. I'm just saying at this rate, you might as well move in. Careful. I might take that as an invitation. I didn't think much of it then. That was the thing about Sadie. She said things that should have landed like a grenade, and somehow they just settled into the room like furniture, comfortable, familiar, nothing to examine too closely. So I laughed it off. She stole my chips anyway, despite bringing her own. We watched 2 more episodes. She fell asleep against the arm of my couch at 11:40, and I sat there for 20 minutes not moving because I didn't want to wake her, which in hindsight was maybe the first sign I chose to ignore. By March, the joke had a rhythm to it. I'd open the door before she even knocked because I'd hear her footsteps in the hallway and somehow always knew. Here for the sugar, the Wi-Fi, or just to haunt my apartment? I'd ask. Depends on the day, she'd say, breezing past me into the kitchen like she owned a percentage of it. I told my brother about it over the phone once, halfway joking, halfway not. My neighbor's basically my roommate at this point. She's over here more than I am. Sounds like you have a girlfriend who doesn't know it yet, he said. She's just friendly, I said, which was the kind of sentence a man says right before life proves him catastrophically wrong. The night everything actually shifted started like every other night. Rain against the windows, the kind of steady March rain that makes Denver feel like a different city entirely. Sadie showed up around 8, hair damp, wearing one of those oversized sweaters that swallowed her hands, holding a container of soup because she'd heard through the building group chat that I'd been sick. You didn't have to do this, I said, letting her in. I know. I wanted to. She set the container down on my counter like it was nothing, like the sentence hadn't just landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there. We ended up on the couch, the soup between us, the TV on, but neither of us really watching it. At some point I made the joke. I don't even remember deciding to say it, it just came out, the same tired bit I'd been running for months. You know, at this point you're here so much, I'm starting to think you just like annoying me on a schedule. I expected the usual. A laugh, a jab back, maybe her stealing the blanket off my lap out of spite. Instead, Sadie went quiet. She set her spoon down slowly, deliberately, the way people do when they're about to say something they've been holding on to. Do you actually think that's why I'm here? She asked. Something in her voice had changed, softer, steadier, none of the usual teasing edge to it. I turned to look at her properly, and for the first time in 11 months of borrowed sugar and stolen chips, I didn't know what to say. I fumbled. You show up a lot. I figured it was a bit. Sadie shifted on the couch, closing some of the distance between us, close enough that I could smell the rain still clinging to her sweater. Jonah, she said, I don't need this much Wi-Fi. I stared at her. What? My router works fine. I fixed it in January. She tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear And for someone who'd never once looked nervous walking into my apartment uninvited, she suddenly looked nervous sitting 3 feet away from me on my own couch. I just kept coming up with reasons. My heart did something embarrassing and immediate, a stumble it hadn't done in years. Reasons for what? She held my gaze, and there wasn't a trace of the usual joke in it. Maybe I just like seeing you. The rain kept going outside. The soup went cold on the coffee table. Somewhere in my chest, 11 months of casual, comfortable, definitely not anything else feelings rearranged themselves into something I could no longer pretend I hadn't been carrying. Sadie, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant it to. You don't have to say anything back, she said quickly, some of her usual bravado creeping back in, a shield going up. I just didn't want to keep pretending the Wi-Fi excuse was believable. I'm a terrible liar. Ask any of my patients' owners. I once told a woman her cat was fine when it very much needed stitches. I laughed, and it broke something loose in me. I've known for a while, I admitted, that it wasn't really about the Wi-Fi. Her eyebrows lifted. You did. I just didn't know what to do about it. You're my neighbor. If I said something and got it wrong, I'd have to see you in the hallway for the rest of my natural life. That would have been devastating for the building's group chat, she said. But her smile had gone soft, real, nothing performed about it. So I kept telling myself it was just a joke. That you visiting all the time was just a bit we had going? Sadie leaned in slightly, close enough now that I could count the raindrops still caught in her hair. It stopped being a joke for me around week 3, she said. I just never had the guts to say it until you handed me the setup. I reached over and took the container of cold soup off the table. Mostly so I had something to do with my hands that wasn't reaching for her face, which was what every other part of me wanted. So what happens now? Now, she said. You stop pretending you don't want me here. I never pretended that. You called me a haunting, Jonah. An affectionate haunting. She laughed, and the sound filled up the apartment the way it always had through the drywall. Except now, there was no wall between us at all. I closed the last of the distance and kissed her, soft at first, careful, like something that had been building for 11 months, deserved a little patience before it finally arrived. She kissed me back like she'd been waiting exactly as long as I had, one hand coming up to rest against my jaw, steady, despite the way I could feel her pulse jump under my fingers when I touched her waist. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine, breathless and smiling. For the record, she said, I'm still borrowing sugar tomorrow. For the record, I said, you never needed a reason. 6 months later, Sadie's lease on 4C quietly expired, and nobody renewed it, because by then, her toothbrush had been sitting next to mine for 2 months, and her cat had claimed my reading chair as permanent territory. The building's group chat had a field day. Mrs. Alvarez in 2B still brings it up every time she sees us in the elevator, usually right before asking when the wedding is. Some nights we still sit on that same couch, rain against the windows, soup going cold on the table because we get distracted by each other instead. And every so often, just to hear her laugh, I still ask her if she's here for the sugar, the Wi-Fi, or just to haunt my apartment. She always gives me the same answer. Maybe I just like seeing you. What would you have done if your neighbor showed up at your door one more time and finally told you the real reason why? Have you ever had a joke turn into something real without you even noticing? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.